All right, everybody, this is In Liberty and Health, episode 22, and I've been looking forward to this conversation for a very, very long time. I got Ted Naiman with me, and he's kind of the guy that really got me to understand how important protein is in its role in satiety, as well as building lean mass and even understanding insulin resistance, which I'm sure that we'll kind of get to that. So, Ted, give a brief intro of yourself, and of course, how are you doing as well?
Hi, Kyle. Thanks for having me. Great to be here. Just intro, I'm a primary care doctor in the Seattle area. I've been doing primary care for about 20 years, and my special interest is diet and exercise for health and health outcomes, especially when it comes to body composition, metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, and then how you can get sicker or healthier with diet and exercise. You know what I'm saying?
Nice. Yeah. Well, that's a great introduction. So your explanation of insulin resistance was the way, or really was the most simple way I ever heard it put, because I heard a lot of people when I initially kind of got into this whole diet and lifestyle sphere. To give a brief background on myself, because I really haven't talked about this on the podcast all that much. Um, I was about 250 pounds, probably about 3 years ago, and I kept hearing people talk about the carnivore diet, and I was just eating all the processed junk in the world that said high protein on it, and downing everything that I could possibly get my hands on. And I thought I was healthy because I worked out, but little did I know that I had about 70 pounds to lose to get to being somewhat lean, but still, I still have room to go. But leaving that aside, um, went carnivore, and that worked really, really well until essentially it didn't. And I was hungry and I was tired. I didn't feel good. I wasn't building as much muscle as I wanted to. And I had these like binges, real bad binges where I would, like 2 weeks I'd be perfect. And then all of a sudden I'd get that little taste of sugar and then game over, man. Face down two cheesecakes later. But um your explanation of insulin resistance, as I understood it, was basically where the fat cells can no longer take in fat or glucose, and they reject that and put it into the bloodstream, and eventually that can make it its way to your viscera, which is basically the fat surrounding your organs. Does that approximate it?
Yeah, right, absolutely. Basically, yeah. You fill up all your fat cells. They don't want any. Well, first of all, your fat cells don't want any more fat. Your triglycerides start going up, which is fat
Mhm.
energy in your bloodstream. And then when every cell in your body is filled with fat, your muscle cells, your fat cells, then all these cells start refusing glucose, and then the glucose stacks up in your bloodstream, and that's basically type 2 diabetes, which is end stage insulin resistance. So yeah, it's basically just getting more and more and more internally over fat, where you fill up, first your subcutaneous adipocytes get filled up, and then you start storing visceral fat, and those get filled up, and then you shove fat in your liver and your pancreas and your organs, and those all get filled. And once like every cell is full, and your liver and your muscle and everything's maxed out with fat, then your cells are like, no, we don't want any glucose. We already have energy toxicity, so forget it. And then the glucose just stays in your bloodstream. And that's diabetes, and that's end-stage insulin resistance. So yeah, it's basically just progressive over fatness. Internal over fatness are literally filling up all your fat cells.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's very simple to understand. Like I said, I heard so many people say it in podcasts, and I could never quite grapple with it until I heard your explanation of it. And I think that's important for a lot of people because they may hear these terms and it sounds pretty arbitrary until you kind of break it down to that level. So, another thing that you talk a lot about is the protein to energy ratio. And you wrote a whole book on it, and this was huge for me. And this is kind of what I tell people, and you can tell me if this is good advice or not. If you want to start on a weight loss journey, let's try to get your protein up and just do like 10-minute walks after each meal. I know that's a big stand efforting thing, but I find that my digestion, the way I feel overall, is much better when I get my walks in. And I do eat a higher protein diet because protein helps with satiation and also building lean tissue. Those two things alone, I feel like, are the probably 50%, if not more, of what's needed to just get you started to losing weight. And you might that might be all that some people need, but yeah, what's the what's kind of your take on that?
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. Like protein percent and then walking more would get, most people most of the way to where they want to be. I mean, that those two are just enormous. Those are, probably the two biggest rocks in the entire jar. Protein percent is probably the single largest satiety per calorie rock in the jar, the single largest lever you can pull. That's why I wrote a whole book on it. And then just non-exercise activity thermogenesis is the biggest exercise piece. So just simple walking. Yeah. I mean, if you get to at least 30% of your calories from protein and hit your 10,000 steps a day, I mean, you're basically going to get almost everybody cured of their prediabetes or, reversing their insulin resistance and at least most of the way to where they want to be health wise.
Yeah, like I said, I found that to be incredibly effective for myself, and I feel like that's kind of a low barrier of entry where just about anybody can do that unless you're, severely overfed to the point that you can't really walk. But I feel like a majority of people can just get up to do the 10-minute walk, hey, once you're done eating, just grab your leash, go for a walk with the dog, whatever you got. And it's very, very sustainable because it's not high impact. It's not like painful to do. It's not like working out or going to failure or anything like that. But that kind of steps onto the other thing is your approach to exercise is interesting as well. I was just watching before we hopped on here your the one video you put up of you doing all calisthenics, and I feel like that's another thing that's a low barrier to entry that a lot of people don't consider. And people tend to think of exercise as like an all or nothing thing. People look at it as I have to do an hour of cardio every day, and then I have to go to the gym for 2 hours and deadlift 300 pounds every single day until I'm absolutely sore and destroyed. And they go to these binary extremes, and nobody just wants to kind of take the middle of the road route that's sustainable. So, what does it look like when you recommend your clients or just the average person to get started on, kind of a journey to health?
Yeah, I mean, just like you said, like there's so much overhead when it comes to like, I'm gonna go to the gym and I'm gonna plan this huge routine and I'm gonna have all my push and pull and leg days and my cardio and I have to have all the equipment and all the time and all the travel and like it's such a big thing that the sustainability gets, lower and lower and lower the bigger and more complicated it is. And so I like to just start in on the ground floor where like, okay, you need to do some sort of pushing exercise to failure at least twice a week. Just get on the floor and do a set of the hardest push-up variation you can do all the way to failure, like right now. Boom, done. And so if, so I have all these clients who basically just every single day they max out on a set of push-ups. It's as hard as they can possibly stand. They go all the way to failure. If a regular push-up is too hard for them, they're doing, pseudo planche push-ups or one-arm push-ups or archer push-ups or just some sort of variation, diamond push-ups, something to make it harder so you can fail in a reasonable, maybe 10 rep range. And so that's how you do these like interstitial mini nano workouts that you can fit in anywhere, anytime. It's not a big elaborate production. And then the sustainability is off the charts. And that's really what you're looking for. Like, if I take anybody and have them do the hardest set of push-ups they can possibly do every day for the next decade, I mean, they're going to have crazy hypertrophy and strength in their pushing chain
Hmm.
versus someone who plans this big elaborate gym routine and ends up only going like, once a month, or maybe it falls off from there, or maybe they just never even go back. And it's really all about sustainability. It's really all about consistency. It's really all about just doing something day after day after day forever. And the simpler you can make it, the easier you can make it, the more you can democratize it where anybody can do it without any equipment or time or money or whatever, the better. And so I'm all about like extreme minimalism. And I'm like, okay, you need like something to pull on, like a pull-up bar or a suspension trainer, and that's it. Everything else is just like push, pull, squats, body weight, floor, something to pull on, done. And the whole book is just centered around doing a full workout with body weight. I don't have anything against weights or the gym. And if you have all that, that's awesome. If you love that, you're set. That's brilliant. But let's make it accessible to anybody, anywhere.
Yeah, and I think that's very, very reasonable. And it's definitely what a lot of people need because I think a lot of people get scared because, once again, it's these binary extremes where people look at it as, well, if I have to do this perfect push pull legs 6 days a week, and this is an hour out of my day, this is an hour I'm not spending with my family, that I can't get work done, then, well, it's just not even worth doing. So kind of pivoting, kind of still on the subject of binary extremes, carnivore and vegan are obviously two kind of big things lately, as well as keto. And, like I mentioned kind of earlier, I did do a carnivore diet, but one of these pitfalls I see, and it's really, really funny, a lot of people do carnivore, and I don't have a problem with that, but people will be getting the fattest ribeyes they could possibly get. They're going to get their coffee and they're going to dump a whole jug of heavy whipping cream in it, and then get a stick of butter and cook their ribeye in that, and get another stick of butter and put it in their coffee. And then they'll say they can't lose weight. Or they'll have a cheat, and their cheat will be like a strawberry. And they'll say, oh my God, carbohydrates are terrible. Look, I had one strawberry and I gained 3 pounds. But then you left out the, whole pound of brisket, the ribeye coated in butter that you had, and you're blaming the strawberry for that. Well, what about all these calories of fat that your body has nothing to do with? And I noticed people think it's, oh, it's got to be carbs, it's got to be the saturated fat. um these binary extremes, people just gravitate towards them because they think it's attractive, it's sexy. If you just eat meat, you're going to lose weight. But there's a lot of nuance and a lot of give and take here.
Yeah, right. So like every single thing on earth is on this U-shaped curve, right?
Mhm.
Where if you get none of it, you're going to die. And if you get too much of it, you're going to die. But if you get to the top of the U, there's this sweet spot where, like,
Mhm.
boom, you get the very best outcomes for whatever the axis parameter is, right? So protein is definitely on this U-shaped curve, right? If your protein's too low, you have to overeat carbs and fats to get enough protein and not be hungry. You're going to massively overeat calories. If your protein's way too hard, you're going to be starving out of your mind. You're going to feel like garbage, and you just can't do it. But you get that protein percent, nailed, and you're just cruise right down to your ideal body composition and stay there as long as you're lifting, of course. So like, carbs are the same way, right? Everyone's like, oh yeah, carbs are bad. Everybody eats too many carbs. I lowered my carbs, got awesome result. I'm going to take it to the logical extreme. If less carbs is better, the best, it would be absolutely zero carbs. And what would be better than just never eating any plants? Like, that's automatically zero carbs. That has to be the best. You just extrapolate. It's like logical geometry, right? A lot of carbs is horrible. Low carb is awesome. Ergo, zero carbs has to be the best carnivore. Boom. Yeah, it doesn't actually work that way. When you get your total carbohydrate below about 10%, satiety per calorie starts going very dramatically negative, the wrong direction. Like you literally have this bit of carbohydrate hunger, and you have to massively overeat calories from fat to try to curb that. Let's say you ate no carbs all day long, you had a ton of protein, you just basically had steak and eggs. Great. But you're still a little bit hungry. Humans are wired to have a hunger for carbohydrates specifically. This is scientific fact. And so at that point in your day, you could either eat 4 pounds of strawberries, which is only like 100 grams of carbs, like maybe 400 calories. It's nothing. Like, you'd be so full, you'd have so much satiety per calorie, it would be off the charts. You wouldn't even need that much, for sure. Like, I don't think anyone could eat that much. But you could even just eat a couple apples, maybe 25, 50 grams of carbs, huge satiety. Or you could just sit there with your 5-pound bag of macadamia nuts, and you're in your pantry at 10 o'clock at night, like eating like your body weight, and you can eat 3,000 calories of those, and it's giving you basically no additional satiety. And the satiety per calorie at that point, when you've already eaten protein and fat all day long, is horrible. It's like terrible. So the sweet spot is definitely low-ish carb, but not zero carb. I mean, honestly, the very lowest ad lib calorie intake is at a total net carbohydrate, non-fiber carbohydrate, of like 20% of your calories. You know what I'm saying? So you do want to be low carb, but you don't want to be zero. anytime you go all or nothing on any of these parameters, it's not good. You do not want to be 100% plant-based, because you're really throwing, a lot of good stuff out the window. You don't want to be 100% carnivore, because humans are scientifically omnivores, and we get a lot of benefits from eating plant foods. We get a lot more folate, we get a lot more magnesium. There's a reason to eat both. There's a reason why most humans eat both of these. And so you kind of don't want to go to the extremes. You don't want to go to the extremes on protein either. Like, you have to find the sweet spot in the center of that U, which is slightly different for everyone, but in general, it's definitely higher on protein than what most people are targeting, and it's definitely lower on carbs than the average American is hitting. That's for sure. And so, like, my big focus in the book is dial up your protein and dial down your net carbohydrates. That's kind of directionally the way most people need to head. But you don't want to go to zero. Yeah, I'm not a big fan.
Yeah, like I said, I did carnivore for 2 years, and I remember um I would lose a bunch of weight and I do all these crazy fasts. I did a 5 day fast and I lost like 25 pounds. But then I just remember, thinking, all right, well, when I finally break this fast, I'm going to be reasonable about it. I'm not going to go crazy. I'm not going to eat a whole ton of food. And surely enough, next thing you know, I had liver, I had like 2 steaks, I had 6 eggs, and later on I had more bacon. And then, I said, all right, well, I'm not going to cheat tonight. And then next thing you know, I'm face down some cheesecake and a Wagyu steak with my dad and older brother at a restaurant. And it's like, when you want to do these insanely restrictive diets, you got to think about the sustainability factor. And I don't think anybody really
Yeah.
does. People just look at these binary extremes because it sounds good. And you get this immediate gratification, especially with low carb diets, because you lose all that stored glycogen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you lose this weight and it's like this weight drops fast. So you're like, man, this is awesome. I'm losing all this weight. But then I think I've heard you even say it in different podcasts that you plateau and you're not quite where you want to be. So you either got to crank up the exercise or crank down the calories. And either one's going to really suck. So why don't we introduce some carbohydrates so you feel a little bit better, you get a little bit more glycogen, your workouts are more productive, and introduce a little bit more exercise instead of, having to fight for one or the other.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And at that point, it's all about the satiety per calorie. Where,
Hmm.
if we're both eating, nothing but steak all day, and then you eat a salad, and I just eat another steak, your satiety per calorie jumped up sharply
Hmm.
compared to mine. So it really, yeah, I mean, I love the fact that going carnivore is like pressing the easy button on radically improving your protein percentage.
Hmm.
It's such a no brainer. But then, like, when you're super strict religious about it, and you just say, "I will never eat a plant food," you're just completely shooting yourself in the foot. And I just can't get on board with that. I don't recommend it.
Yeah, and it seems to be kind of waning. And well, like you said, it's good because it increases protein. And I do think people probably should eat more meat. But to go to that binary extreme, I think a lot of people will find that you're not going to be able to sustain it. And, now I'm a little bit, I don't want to say I'm necessarily a flexible dieting guy, but where my macros at are now, I'm usually at about 205 grams of protein, um, about 190 grams of fat, and about 205 grams of carbohydrate a day. And I feel satiated. My workouts are much better. Um, I get to enjoy foods that I want to enjoy. Sometimes I even sneak a little bit of junk food in there, if you want to call it that. But I think people, like you said, shoot themselves in the foot when they expect to be able to sustain doing this extremely restrictive diet. So, kind of tapping on that end, what's your thoughts on cholesterol and saturated fat? Because that's been a very, very hotly debated topic. Some people think that, this little bit of cholesterol is going to kill you. Some people say, oh, saturated fat and cholesterol, eat as much as you want. If your LDL's 900, then you're perfectly fine.
Right. So in the low carb world, we're famous for just demonizing glucose type carbohydrates, like digestible glycemic carbs, like your sugar and stuff like that.
Mhm.
We're like, no human ever needs to eat this. It's basically just a bunch of empty calories, right? Like, why, the less sugar you eat, the less glycemic carbs, the better. This bread is 10 teaspoons of sugar, and this, cereal is 30 teaspoons of sugar, and you just don't need all of this. Um, I think what people don't realize is saturated fat is the exact same thing on the vegan and carnivore are just opposite sides of the same coin. And saturated fat plays the exact same role in carnivore that sugar and glycemic carbs does in the vegan world. There's zero requirement for saturated fat in the human diet because we make saturated fat just great. That's what we do with any extra calories. Like, we're awesome at it. You never have to eat any saturated fat. It literally is just empty calories. You do not need to eat it. And this triggers people in the low carb world bad, right? They don't want to hear that. Some people like worship saturated fat. They're like, butter, heavy cream, bacon, blah, blah, blah.
My grain-fed ribeye.
Yeah, they're all empty calories. Like, you absolutely have to eat PUFA. Some polyunsaturated fats are essential. Your omega-3s, your omega-6s, these are essential fatty acids that you have to eat at least a little bit of. Saturated fat, you don't need any. So I'm not a huge fan, and I'm not a fan because I'm scared that it's going to raise your cholesterol, although it does actually raise cholesterol. That's a scientific fact. But I'm more afraid of it because it's empty calories. You know what I'm saying? It's fairly poor for satiety per calorie, just like sugar is poor for satiety per calorie. So sugar and saturated fat are opposite sides of the same coin, both diluting out protein and minerals and micronutrients and all the things that you really need nutritionally and all the things that you really are looking for when it comes to satiety per calorie. Now, they're both fairly harmless. If you're super lean and you're metabolically healthy, you can basically eat all the saturated fat you want, and it just goes straight in your fat cells, no problem. But if you're over fat, eating more saturated fat is a huge problem. Like, it's really going to make you more insulin resistant. Same thing with sugar. If I'm super lean, super active, super healthy, I can eat all the sugar I want, no problem. Just replenishes glycogen in my liver and muscles. But if I'm over fat and I already have fatty liver and I already have ectopic fat and I already have insulin resistance and I eat more sugar, that's just completely bad. But what people, people who, read my book, The PE Diet, and we have protein up here and then carbs and fats are down here, where you're trying to minimize both of them kind of equally, understand that sugar and saturated fat are really quite comparable in terms of their empty calorie, low satiety per calorie role. So I hate to say that because all the carnivores just don't want to hear that. But I'm here to tell people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear.
Right. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable way to go about explaining it. And you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but to me, it kind of looks like the saturated fat and sugar debate because, well, low carb people will tell you that sugar is going to kill you. Sugar is inherently bad for you. And then perhaps a lot of the plant-based or even flexible dieting people will tell you saturated fat's bad for you and it's going to kill you. Do you think it's more so that the empty calories provide no satiety and it causes you to overeat, which then causes the illness? Kind of like the chicken or the egg. Do you think the saturated fat and sugar cause you to overconsume because they're empty calories, or do you think that they are inherently bad?
I think it's absolutely both. So
Okay.
the sugar and the saturated fat, these empty calories, dilute out the protein and minerals in your food, and you just passively overconsume them both and end up storing them, and you just slowly get fatter and fatter and fatter, not really harming you as long as you're way below your personal fat threshold. If I have plenty of storage space, it doesn't matter. I can get away with that. But once I start getting over fat, once there's too much fat in my bloodstream, my triglycerides are high, my fasting insulin's high. Once my fasting glucose starts going up or I'm pre-diabetic, then they're going to acutely, actively be bad. Like basically people who are pre-diabetic or even diabetic, they eat a bunch of glycemic carbs and their sugar goes through the roof, and this glycates their proteins, and that's actively bad for you. It damages your endothelium. It's like literally bad. At the same time, if you eat a bunch of saturated fat, if you're a diabetic and you eat a whole stick of butter right now, nothing happens to your glucometer right away, but you wake up the next morning and your sugar is like 60 points higher than it's ever been. And so there's this huge delay. between when you ingest saturated fat and when it completely destroys your blood sugar the next day when you're diabetic, that people give fat a free pass because they don't understand this. They don't understand
Mhm.
that glucose is a volatile fuel that effectively floats on top of the fat in your bloodstream. And the majority of energy in your bloodstream is fat most of the time. And so when you eat all this fat, it gives you like a super high blood sugar the next morning. And a lot of people don't understand that. And so they're like, oh, carbs are bad and fat's fine. And they're like, oh, my sugar, it's 50 points higher this morning. I don't understand. I didn't eat any carbs at all. I didn't even eat a cucumber because it was like one carb. You know what I mean? How could my sugar be so high? It's probably all the bacon and the saturated fat you ate. So basically it's both. Like when you're below your personal fat threshold and insulin sensitive, they're just diluting out nutrients and adding calories that you're passively overeating, making you steadily get fatter. Once you're over fat, both of them literally screw up your health actively because you're dangerously energy toxic and the energy in your bloodstream and your cells is going up, which is bad for your mitochondria and your endothelium and your organs and everything.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I never heard anybody really talk about that. And it seems like CGMs are a thing that's popping up a lot lately. Continuous glucose monitors, in case anybody doesn't know what we're talking about. But they'll say, "Oh, well, I had this carbohydrate, my insulin spiked this much or whatever,"
Mm,
but they don't consider, the long term or acute response. You may eat a ton of carbohydrates and your insulin may go super high, but it's going to come right back down, right? But,
right.
if you eat a ton of saturated fat or, drink your whole coffee with a stick of butter, heavy cream, and MCT oil, and that's all you had, but you're fasting, then, like you said, it may take a little bit longer, but your resting blood sugar is going to be a little bit higher because it's a delayed response. Because, as far as I understand it, the fat takes longer to get into your blood versus glucose, which is a more readily available fuel.
Exactly. That's exactly how it works. And interestingly, the area under the curve for things like insulin and glucose are very similar isocalorically. So there's not as much difference as people would like to think. There's just a huge delay on the fat side.
Yeah, like I said, you see all these people who, think that if a little fat's good, then more must be better. And I know people personally, and I love these people dearly, but they smear butter all over stuff and try to get the fattiest cut of meat that they can, and they think that, oh well, like I said, if a little bit of fat is good, then more must be better. Um, so I guess pivoting to another point, what do you find diet wise usually ends up working the best and being the most sustainable for people? Like, what kind of foods do you find that people more so gravitate towards?
So honestly, the very, very best and most sustainable approach, in my opinion, is to take exactly what you're eating now, all the foods you like and that you are used to, and that you're going out of your way to get, and then tweaking them and finding some sort of way to make the protein percent higher and the fiber higher, and then the net carbs and the grams of fat lower. So, like, okay, you're eating eggs and bacon for breakfast. Uh, well, now you want to eat 2 eggs and 2 egg whites, or some turkey bacon. You know what I'm saying? A little higher protein percent, a little bit lower glycemic carbs, a little bit lower saturated fat. You trade in your, cornflakes for like oatmeal. That would be a higher protein percent, more fiber, lower glycemic carbs. You just make little substitutions. You take whatever food you're eating now and find a slight substitution that's going to bump up the protein and fat a little and drive down the net carbs and the fat a little bit. And you're just incrementally sort of like progressing it almost like you would in the gym lifting weights, right? Like, so you're not just going to drop a 500-pound barbell on somebody to bench press when they're a total noob, right? It would be the same thing if you're like, okay, boom, you're carnivore now. Like all you get to eat is just ribeye, right? That's like the same thing. No, you start out with just the bar, and once you got some good form, some reps, you stick like a microplate on there. You know what I mean? That's what you're trying to do with your diet. It's just like a slight progression, and you're trying to do it in a sustainable way. Okay, all right, can you just eat nothing but ribeye forever? Hell no. But could you switch from the fattiest bacon you can possibly find to like some turkey bacon? Yeah. Could you go from like just a brick of cheese to like a brick of low fat cheese, which is going to be way higher protein percent, higher satiety per calorie. It's, yeah, you could probably do that. So you're like making these little substitutions. So I like just looking for foods that people like that are slightly higher in protein, fiber, slightly lower in net carbs and fat.
Cool. Yeah, and I think that's a very, very sustainable way. That kind of dovetails nicely into the conversation around artificial sweeteners. Now, I see a lot of people who freak out about sucralose and aspartame, but as far as I can see, and from what I hear from people who are way, way smarter than me in this stuff, um, it doesn't seem like they're that bad. It seems like typically what they do with these experiments, which they did, from what I understand, with salt as well, is that they get mice and then they give them a whole ginormous bag full of, aspartame or salt or sucralose, and then the rat dies or something like that. And then they say, look, it's bad, but they're stripping out the context of the small amount of sucralose that you put in your coffee or you get in a Gatorade, Propel or Propel. Jesus, it's a thing for me and my fiance. But the small amount of aspartame or whatever you get in the stuff you're consuming in your day-to-day life is nowhere near the same amount that they're giving these rodents in tests. So, what are your thoughts around artificial sweeteners? Do you think there's damage to the gut? Do you think they're bad? Or do you think, good to go?
I love artificial sweeteners. I'm like completely unafraid of this crap, right? So these are some extremely well studied molecules. And, aspartame is one of the best studied chemicals on the planet. We have a ridiculous number of studies on aspartame. This is basically metabolized into two naturally occurring amino acids that are super harmless. It's completely harmless. I am a zero afraid of aspartame. It's completely great. Uh, it literally satisfies a sweet taste that humans have a hunger for with no calories. So it's a massive win. We have studies showing that people drinking diet soda actually lose more weight than people who are randomized in RCT to drink water, because it's satisfying a sweet craving that they have for no calories at all. So I love diet soda, love artificial sweeteners. I love aspartame. I love erythritol. I love sucralose. I'm not afraid of any of these. And a lot of people freak out about these, which I think is ridiculous, and they're quite harmless. And all the like GI microbiome studies are using just insane, ridiculous quantities in other mammals, and it's just it's we have none of that in humans. You show me any study where these artificial sweeteners damage humans in any way. There's like a glycemic index of 0, insulin index of 0. People lose more weight on artificial sweeteners than water. There's no GI microbiome data in humans, especially consuming just reasonable amounts. And so I am completely unafraid of this stuff. I actually think it's a hack that is quite helpful. And all of your bodybuilders and your bikini models and your Instagram aesthetic people are using the hell out of these artificial sweeteners, and they're all ripped and jacked, and they could probably kill you and I both with their bare hands. And there's just nothing to be afraid of there. There's just so many things in life that you could be afraid of legit. You got to triage, and aspartame's not it, bro. I'm like telling people like that's that you gotta think bigger on things to be afraid of, for real.
Man, if this gets out to the carnivores and low carb people, they'll have your head, man. I'm telling you.
I know. I'm actually super unpopular. Like right now, like there was 3 people still listening. Now it's 0, like for sure. Sorry about that.
Oh no, man.
This is your last podcast, by the way.
Yeah. It won't make it to quarter of 100. Right. We're just kicking people out left and right here. So that kind of gets to another question. You mentioned weight loss a lot. It seems like there's a lot of science coming out surrounding the speed of weight loss. And it seems like to me that it suggests that people who lose weight slower tend to maintain a better metabolic rate, and they tend to keep the weight off a lot better. I'm sure everybody heard the stat that 95% of diets fail after 3 years. So it's, 75% of people fail after the first year, 85 after the second year, and then 95 after the third year. For me, especially, I found this to be true. I started using Layne Norton's Carbon Diet Coach app. And when I slowly lost the weight, it felt so much easier. And especially after going off carnivore, where I was, just in this extreme, I'd lose a bunch of weight during the week, and then all of a sudden I'd binge, I'd gain all the weight back, and it's just this never ending cycle. Um, to me, it seems like when you take a more reasonable approach, where, okay, you monitor your weight and you lose the weight slowly, and maybe you even stop, you take a little diet break. To me, it felt very sustainable. And I think, to me, it looks like that's the best way to go about weight loss. And, you do see a lot of people that say that, oh, I want to lose 20 pounds yesterday, so I need to get all off me now. So, what's your thoughts on kind of the stuff surrounding the speed of weight loss and how that maintains metabolism?
Gotcha. Okay. So the fatter and more energy toxic you are, the faster you can lose weight, and the faster you will lose weight, and the faster I want you to lose weight. As you get thinner and thinner and thinner and more metabolically healthy, the slower, the better. You know what I'm saying? So if you're like a 600-pound, horrifically diabetic, your blood sugar is 500. Oh yeah, just like, just have one protein shake a day for the first month, and boom, you'll lose like 60 pounds and your blood sugar will be normal. And that would be awesome. Like I want, the fastest weight loss ever. So it's like this exponential curve where if you're super overweight and super insulin resistant, you lose weight the fastest, and that's normal and that's natural and that should happen, and that's what we want to happen. So the more insulin resistant and over fat you are, the faster you'll lose weight, and that's a good thing. But as you get thinner and thinner, if you're pretty much metabolically healthy, now the slower you go, the better. And as you get lower and lower and lower, if you're 14% body fat and you just want to walk around at 12%, I want you to, that's a 1 year project right there. You know what I'm saying? As you get closer and closer and closer to your ideal body weight, it just planes out asymptotically and takes longer and longer and longer. And then to lose the last 1 pound and just walk around thinner and keep it off forever, it's going to take you, like half a decade. So you're basically going from boom, you lose 20 pounds the first week because you're massively energy toxic and over fat, to like, okay, it takes you like 5 years to get 1% down to your absolute ideal body composition. And that's the way you want to do it, right? The thinner and healthier you are, the slower you want to go. There's this ratio of fat loss to fat-free mass loss. So basically it's fat to total body weight loss. And, ideally you want 100%, you want to lose just 100% fat and 0% fat-free mass, no lean mass. That never happens. I mean, but you get a lot higher percentages of fat loss when you're really over fat, right? And then as you get thinner and thinner and thinner, it gets worse, it gets harder, it gets uglier. If you're like pretty lean and you just fast, you just stop eating, half of what you lose is lean mass. Like it's disastrous. If you just look at like the average person just trying to diet, you end up losing about 3/4 of your weight as fat mass and 1/4 of your weight as fat-free mass, lean mass loss. So that's like average person just going on a diet. 75% is fat, 25% is lean mass. But you can really tweak that to more like 90% fat loss and only 10% lean mass loss by, number one, prioritizing the hell out of protein. Number two, doing resistance exercise the whole time to keep your muscles. And number three, going as slow as you can. Keep the caloric deficit only like 300 calories a day. Do it really slow, really gradual, no crash dieting. And then you're going to get 90% of that weight loss as fat and only 10% as fat-free mass. And then you're going to maintain your metabolic rate. And then you're not going to be as hungry, and then you're going to keep the weight off. And you're not, if you just stop eating and like half of what you lose is lean mass, and boom, you're going to rebound. You're going to refeed on just a jar of peanut butter. You're going to instantly gain all the fat back. Your metabolic rate's actually going to still be lower. You might end up fatter than you were before. It's just going to be bad, right? So yeah, absolutely. The slower, the better as you get leaner and healthier.
Right, right. And I think it's good for people to hear that, like, look, this doesn't have to be a super extreme thing. Um, what were your thoughts? A lot of people talked about this, but I think it was The Biggest Loser, where the people had lost a whole ton of weight and their metabolisms were damaged, for lack of a better word, years and years later. Do you see people in that kind of situation a lot, or do you think that's more of an outlier where people kind of overtrain and overdiet?
No, I think that's definitely a real thing. And Kevin Hall's study is absolutely fascinating. And there really is something to this. And so you actually don't want this extraordinarily rapid um, fat loss through extreme unsustainable exercise volumes and extreme hypocaloric diets. This is not great. And I don't recommend it. It's really not. You're it's going to be so hard to keep that off, and you're just going to white knuckle it, and then you're going to fail. And that's part of the reason why 95% of diets fail. So yeah, you really do want to be a little bit more sustainable, right? You mostly want to just crank up your protein percent, only dial your calories back, 300 to 500 maybe per day, and then throw in a little bit more cardio to drive a caloric deficit. So you're doing half of it with diet and half with exercise. So it's not, you're not overdoing one or the other. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know you're all right. My dogs are just running around a little bit
Sorry.
earlier. I'm sure you saw my dogs running around too. um, oh, geez, I just lost my train of thought. Okay, no, actually, so when I heard about that, I thought that was really, really interesting. That you could people really damage their metabolism. I mean, it's crazy to think that people can lose that kind of weight. And okay, now I know where I want to go with that. I'm sorry. Um, I've heard the concept of fat cell hyperplasia, where when people essentially lose all that weight and they damage our metabolisms so much that when they regain the weight, that they can actually get fatter than they were before. Have you ever seen that? And have you had to kind of train people back out of that?
Um, so you're not really going to be fatter than you were before.
Hmm.
But one of the things that happens is that if you're someone who's had a lot of fat cell hyperplasia, so like let's say you were super super overweight, and you sprouted a trillion new fat cells, right, just to hold all the fat. Then as you lose weight, as you lose fat, your fat cells all shrink down, and your fat cells like to be a certain size. They like to be like half full, you know what I mean? That's their
Hmm.
job. And so your leptin gets really, really low if you've tried to deflate all of those fat cells, and you just can't quite do it. So you're going to walk around with all those fat cells half full, because that's all you can sustain without your leptin going any lower. Versus someone who is never over fat, they have way fewer fat cells. They can walk around with all their fat cells half full, and they look a lot leaner. They are a lot leaner. They have a lower body fat percentage because they just physically have fewer fat cells. And that's why you just kind of never want to be overweight in the first place, which
Hmm.
is easier said than done. Like, of course, nobody wants to be overweight in the first place, but like, you kind of don't want. That's why I really don't like when people do these sort of bulk and cut cycles, because when you're bulking, you might
Hmm.
actually have adipocyte hyperplasia where you're sprouting new fat cells, and then they're permanently going to be there. Um, and it's really hard to get rid of them. I mean, if you're just super white knuckling at hypocaloric and trying to shrink those things down for like a decade, they do actually kind of go away a little bit. So you can eventually gradually get rid of some of that fat, but it takes forever. And so you basically don't want those extra fat cells in the first place if possible.
Right. Okay. So that was another thing that I kind of wanted to touch on you with, and I'm glad you brought it up. Main gaining versus bulking and cutting. What's your go-to? It seems like you've taken a liking to Greg Doucette, and I have too, as of recently. I like his cookbook. I like a lot of his content. I think he's hilarious. But I like the idea of main gaining because some people will take a bulk as a screw it, everything's on the menu. But yeah, I'll kind of let you lead off on there. What's your opinion? Do you like main gaining? Do you like bulk and cut?
I'm all in on main gaining. Like this bulk and cut thing is ridiculous. First of all, these extremes are never really good. And secondly, your whole mindset should be constantly trying to get a higher lean mass, more muscle, and less fat at the same time. And you
Mhm.
want to just constantly be leveraging both of those a little bit in a sustainable way, and just keep it that way forever. You know what I mean? Because you always want to be trying to gain muscle, and doing optimal resistance exercise, to failure. you want to constantly be working on lowering your body fat, because if you just like live in the modern food environment, you're basically just steadily getting fatter. All Americans are getting fatter at like 1 to 3 pounds per year, just
Hmm.
forever. And so it's like you actively have to be trying to be less fat in the modern food environment at all times to not gain weight. So you should constantly have this mindset of trying to get higher lean mass, lower fat mass, and you're driving that with protein percent, satiety per calorie, resistance exercise, cardio, all of these things. And so I like doing all of these a little bit all the time. You know what I'm saying? You're just constantly doing a little cardio, a little resistance, a little higher protein percent, a little lower carbs and fats. You're trying to main gain, you're trying to recomp constantly, and you just do that forever. Versus like, okay, now I'm in a bulk phase, I'm going to gain a whole bunch of weight, only a little bit will be muscle, and then I have to cut all that weight off, and then I'll lose that little bit of muscle anyway when I'm dieting down, because that's just part of what happened. And so it's like, it's just not, I don't like bulk and cut. I'm all in on the main gaining. Sign me up for team Coach Greg for sure. Definitely.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I tend to agree because the way that he put it, if I recall correctly, and the way you just kind of put it as well, was that, you may gain, let's say, 5 pounds of muscle, but you gain 10 pounds of fat. Well, now you have to cut that back off. And in the process of that, you're going to lose some lean mass as well.
Right.
Um, so this dovetails into something that we could pretty much, I want to ask you this and we could probably wrap, but fasting. I used to be all in on fasting, and one of the interviews I heard you do, you talked about Peter Attia and how he used to do the 3 days and the 7 days. And I was really, really big on this too at one point. I said, man, you got to do the 3 day fasts. And, your growth hormone goes up, so you're going to be able to build muscle. But, it seems like fasting really only imposes a benefit in the fact that it imposes a caloric restriction. Other than that, do you maybe get increased growth hormone? Yeah, but it seems like that may not be a key driver in developing muscle. And plus, if you don't have any calories, then you don't have any protein to build the muscle with. So, what's your take on fasting?
Yeah, like no matter how high your growth hormone goes up when you're fasting, you're not making any muscle, period. This huge growth hormone spike is a desperate attempt for your body to not just completely catabolize all your lean mass for calories, like a desperation trying to save a little bit of muscle, but never, hell no, not building any.
Mhm.
Absolutely not, right? So yeah, you're basically just pure catabolic when you're fasting. And the goal is to try to lose more fat than muscle.
Mhm.
And so that's why I like, if you're going to do anything extended, maybe a protein sparing modified fast where you're still eating some protein and lifting weights and just desperately trying to hang on to a little bit more muscle. But fasting is one of these things that's definitely on this U-shaped curve, right? If you fast too long, the percentage of muscle loss is easily 50%. Like you're gonna, if you do an extended fast as a lean person, you're gonna lose half muscle, half fat. And when you go back to refeed, you're going to eat a whole jar of peanut butter and you're going to gain the fat back, boom, overnight. And the muscle is not quite as rapid. So I don't like extended fasting. It's gone, you've gone over the sweet spot of the U and you're on the other side,
Mhm.
especially if you're lean. Now, if you're dangerously over fat and uncontrolled diabetic, you can actually get away a little bit more with that because you have so much energy in your bloodstream. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
But you still are going to lose way more lean mass than you really wanted to. So I don't really recommend extended fasting. I think a little bit of fasting is good because it really gets you in touch with hunger and fullness. It gets you a little more fat adapted. You're not just constantly feeling like you have to eat a bowl of cornflakes. Like, the average American is eating has a 16-hour eating window and eats carbs 8 times a day for 300 grams. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
300 grams, 8 times a day, 16-hour window. And I feel like that gets people on a little bit of a blood sugar roller coaster where you're never letting yourself get hungry and you're just feeling this glycogen fall and then eating a snack. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's snack time, right? Because like I haven't had cornflakes for 2 hours. So now it's time for a
Yeah.
snack. And so I feel like a little bit of intermittent fasting is helpful because it gets you more fat adapted and it gets you really in touch with hunger and fullness. And it gets you hungry enough that you could just eat some protein, like a chicken breast or something, instead of just like, drinking a juice or eating, pretzels or something that's just
Yeah.
pure carbs to raise your glycogen. So I like a little bit of intermittent fasting. I love 16/8. I think that's the sweet spot for most people. I love the whole like lean gain 16/8 thing. So if
Mhm.
I just had to pick one thing for everybody, that would typically be where it's at. That's what I'm doing myself. And I'm not super rigid about it. If I'm really hungry, I'll eat sooner. If I'm not hungry, I'll eat later. I try to listen to my body a little bit on that one. But I think that fasting is definitely on the U-shaped curve. You have to find the sweet spot. And it's not one meal a day. It's less than that. And it's not multi-day fast.
Right, and I totally think that's a reasonable way to go about it. I guess one last question, and we'll rock and roll. Um, what do you think about cheat meals? So I've heard it said that if you're, let's say, glycogen depleted and you have a cheat meal, then you'll actually soak up some of those calories. And obviously, the calories still matter, but because you're glycogen depleted, that your muscle will absorb some of those, the glycogen from the carbohydrate. So, you have that big old piece of cheesecake, then you can saturate your muscles with glycogen, and you may not, gain a ton of weight, but you're not it's not quite as bad as people might think.
Right. Well, there's kind of two different things there. There's
Sure.
a there's a carb refeed, right? So you can have a carb refeed that has no fat at all. Like bodybuilders will. So if you're a bodybuilder in peak week, what you do is you intentionally eat absolutely no carbs for 3 whole days, and you actually work your ass off doing cardio for a glycogen depletion. You do glycogen depletion workouts and eat no carbs for 3 days, and you suck every bit of glycogen out of your body. You're completely glycogen depleted. Then you do this carb load where you're eating, anywhere from 300 to 1,000 grams of carbs every day for 2 or 3 days,
Hmm.
and you just massively pump all your muscles up with glycogen, and you can get like much more glycogen in there than was in there before because you did this depletion and then carb refeed. If you do these carb refeeds with no fat at all, the fat spillover is going to be minimal. So I actually love people who've been on super low carb diets to do some sort of carb refeed, but maybe keep the fat extremely low. You know what I mean? Just like I don't really like sugar necessarily because it's just like super low satiety per calorie, but something like rice maybe, or
Hmm.
potatoes or fruit or something like that. This is kind of good actually every once in a while, I think. um, that's different than a cheat meal. A cheat meal is always going to be carbs and fats together, right? Cheat meals,
Right.
donuts and pizza and everything. And what a lot of low carbers do when they're cheating, they're actually giving themselves a carb refeed, which is very helpful. But all the fat in these foods that are 50% carbs and fat together, the French fries, the pizza, the donuts, the
The
candy bars, the
milkshakes.
cakes, the cookies, yeah. Um, your goal is to get the carb refeed, but the 50% fat that comes with it just passively goes straight into your fat cells. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
So that's going to be more damaging. Now, like I do both of these all the time. I don't like I don't recommend. So cheating is on a U-shaped curve too. You don't want to cheat weekend.
Yeah.
You don't want to cheat week. You don't want to cheat weekend. You don't even want a whole cheat day. You might want one cheat meal, or even better yet, just a cheat food here and there. That's what I do. Like I'll just sprinkle in a couple cheat foods. You know what I'm saying? And so you have to find out where the cheating is going to work for you. Can you do 90-10, like 90% pretty solid clean foods with a higher satiety per calorie, and 10% low satiety per calorie foods that are just basically sugar and oil mixed together, which is just going to be calories. And I think that's going to happen for most people, and you have to make some room for it. But I also think that you might want to keep that mentally separate from a carb refeed with no fat, because that's like a little bit different physiologically. The cheap food is spiking dopamine in your brain because we get a ton of dopamine release when we eat a food that's high carb, high fat, high energy density, all three. That's what we call the trifecta in the book, right? Like your
Hmm.
pizza and your donut. That's hedonic, that's spiking dopamine. um that's like lightly addictive, you know what I mean? A little bit different than just a pure carb refeed, which would just be eating like rice cakes or rice,
Hmm.
or something with no fat in it at all. And there's room probably for both of those in most people's diet. And it does I think it's helpful to kind of separate those out mentally and realize when you're eating just a pure carb and replenishing glycogen versus when you're having a cheat food, which is carbs and fats together, and you probably are going to store some fat from that.
Right, and that is the one thing I notice about most hyperpalatable foods or foods that people tend to overconsume is that they're always high in carbs, they're high in fat, and low in protein. Like you
Right.
said, it's the trifecta, and the essentially most of the carnivore low carb people will say, "Oh, well, look, carbs are bad for me." Well, is it the carbs or is it the fact that they're mixed with hyperpalatable fats that are just so easy to overconsume? It's probably the combination of both. It's not just the carbohydrates. Ted, I want to thank you so much for coming on. I think people are going to get a lot of value out of this. Every time I hear you speak, I know I get a lot of value out of it. You distill things in a very, very easy and digestible way for the average person to understand. And I think you make understanding how to lose weight very simple for the average person. And for that, I'm sure I know I am, and I know a lot of other people are grateful as well. So, Ted, go ahead, plug your stuff. We'll get out of here.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, like basically the best thing I've produced is the book called The PE Diet, and you can basically buy it anywhere books are sold, or you can go to thepediet.com or tednaiman.com to buy an online copy of the book. That's probably the most interesting thing I've got. Or you can follow me on social media. I'm at Ted Naiman on Twitter and places like that.
Awesome. Well, one more time, I just want to thank you for coming on. This was In Liberty and Health, episode 22. And until next time, everybody, thanks for listening.